So when you guys are ready to put your designs on your pot, and before you do that, paint it, well, you have to paint it. So you have to make sure it's leather hard, right? If I tap it, it does not change in shape, but it's still soft enough so that I can smooth it in if I need to, or move the clay around on the surface, but it's firm. Okay, so I have my design. It's partly inspired by Brianna Leach, who made a similar design, but I just changed it a little bit. But I like that. I think it would work well with the shape of my pot. So I have my design on paper, right? That's the first step. Now I'm going to take my big paintbrush and my little paintbrush, because you'll probably need both. And I'm going to take off the tape of my cup of underglaze. Remember, underglaze is like liquefied clay with paint in it, with pigment. So it will dry to the consistency of clay, and it will be matte when it dries. Okay, so your paint will probably have a lot of liquid separated from that chunk of paint, so I want you to mix it all up, combine that liquid with that goopy stuff, get it really mixed in well. Okay, so once you have it all mixed up, you can use either of your brushes. When you're doing things that are close to the edge, maybe use your smaller brush and use your larger brush for larger areas. I'm going to leave this to the side for now. I would recommend putting this in a water cup. Actually, I will do that now, just to be a good example. Alright, so put it in a cup of water so that it stays healthy, a healthy paintbrush. And I'm going to use my bigger brush, and I'm just going to brush this paint on the outside of my clay. Now, you'll notice as you're doing this, you will see streaks in your paint that show the gray of the clay underneath. You're going to need to do 2 coats. If you do not do 2 coats, it will look streaky like this when it dries and when it's fired. Okay, and it will be even more dramatic because when the clay is fired, it turns white, right? This gray state that it's in right now is only because it's unfired and still has moisture in it. So you want to paint the whole surface. I'm going to paint right up to the rim, and I'm not going to paint my inside. If you do want to paint your inside and it's easy to access, then be my guest and do that. The one thing I'm not going to paint is the bottom. I'm going to leave that just plain gray. So I'm going to paint right up to where my clay would. Mine actually sits on a tilt, so I'm going to go a little bit further in here. And I'm going to paint the rim around the bottom. Be very careful if you're holding your pot upside down. And if it's fragile, just be gentle with it. Okay, so just be as neat as you can. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, if you did not already do this, please put your initials in the bottom of your pot. I'm going to put Miss J. Okay, put the initials in the bottom, and this way I can tell whose it is after I fire it, even though I'll have photos from Google Classroom. But initials are good because you're an artist, and artists sign their work, usually. So yeah, this is straightforward. Just brush this paint on. Let it dry before you add a second coat. And again, be neat with your edges. Like, you're going to see it very dramatically if you are sloppy anywhere, or if you don't put 2 coats on. So part of your grade is to be neat, right? You're a craftsman. So I want you to have careful, neat craftsmanship. So for something like that, I should probably use my smaller brush. And if you have it in a water cup, you want to dry it off before you start using it. You don't want it to be too liquidy. And then I can get in crevices, small parts, and get a nice neat edge. And again, I'm going to have to do that twice to get a good cover. Be careful though, your bristles, your brush bristles will, like the hairs in your brush will shed, so just be careful that they don't shed into your clay surface. You don't want them to dry on there and create some texture. I often just pull them out. Wow, that was a lot. Okay. Gross. So I want to make sure my first coat is covering well, and then I can start painting my second coat, because by then it will have enough time to dry if I've gone around my whole pot with a good first coat. You know, that time in between is enough for it to dry, and start on the second. And your whole cup, you have a whole cup of paint, you probably won't use all of it. I just gave you more than you might need, so don't be afraid if you don't use all of it. Right, so now at this point I'm getting rid of all of my streaks that I once had on the surface of my pot. And if you get paint on any part that you don't want paint on, you can just scratch it off or rub it off. It's very forgiving because it's just liquefied clay. And again, this clay will be turning white. So whatever I'm not painting will be bright white. And so I just want to be conscious of my design. Do I want this whole pot to be white inside? Right? If I don't, then be careful to paint the inside. Some of you might have a much easier time painting the inside if you don't have a tight rim. So you can do that. Like if you want to make a bowl and you want that whole thing to be black and white, then you can paint the inside and your designs will be white. Right, so this, my pot keeps leaning on, so just keep painting over that, but if you don't see it, it's no big deal. Also, my initials are starting to fade, so if, before you're finished, make sure that you flip it over again and check those. Make sure they're still there. Doing this lefty. It's not move. So you want your pot to dry fully before you start carving into it. So make sure that you give at least a few minutes of drying time before starting to carve. You should not see any more shiny spots. It should be matte gray, right, because it's not completely black quite yet. And even after I fire it the first time, it will not be dark black. However, I'm going to add a gloss glaze, and that will make the black stand out. Be very saturated. It will also make it food safe, so that you can eat from it if desired. When you're ready to start carving, make sure your paint is completely dry and that there are no streaks or imperfections. And then you can start carving. So I'm going to use two different tools, but predominantly one tool. I love to use this mini loop tool. Okay, it's very tiny, and as you carve, you'll have some scraps, and I'll show you, and you'll just have to brush them off as you do that. And you just have to be careful not to push too hard because this can go very deep. Well, only as deep as the tip, but you just want to use it to scrape the paint off. You also have this needle tool, which you can also use to scrape the paint off. This is probably better for more fine lines if you are making fine lines. Be careful that your design is not super thin and minimal, because remember, I want you to balance the white and the black space. So if you just draw, say, a smiley face with 2 dots and a smile, right, with just one thin line, you'll hardly see it because it'll just be a little bit of white amongst a huge black surface, and obviously won't be visually pleasing. So try to create a design that wraps around the whole pot and balances both the white and the black space. So I'm going to go with this design, and I'll start with my amoeba looking shapes, and then I'll do the inside. So very gently carving out a shape, and it's so satisfying to carve into this soft surface. So I'll have little crumbles. I'll have to move. Okay. I'm being careful not to touch the pot so much because I don't want to ruin the paint surface. Because it is, even though it's dry, it still will easily rub off. Again, I'm hardly pressing down, not making very much of an indent. Okay, so I repositioned. Hopefully this is a better view. You can also flip your pot over. Mine is very uneven, so I don't know if this is going to be a good move or not. So it's stable enough. I'm very gentle with it, just to make it easier to work with.